All right, thanks everybody. If you can hear me, give me a thumbs up. Everybody? All right, perfect. My name is Paul Vacheski. I'm the director of Randall School of Real Estate, and today's topic is ethics in today's real estate. The course number you're going to get today is 0919R. I'll make sure that everybody has their certificates. I'm going to mail them out to the office tomorrow, or probably Monday or Tuesday. Just a couple of housekeeping items. The Real Estate Commission decided to go to a new database. I'm sure most of you know, but they did it right in the middle of CE season and renewal season. And what that's done is created a lot of confusion because they didn't beta test it first. And it's an absolute disaster. So we will report your attendance for the class probably tomorrow, no later than Monday. And it's supposed to show up immediately on your portal as of 4 o'clock that day. However, it hasn't been happening. So it's a good idea to get onto your individual portals. First of all, you have to make a new username and password and then just see where all your continuing ed is. We've been getting literally probably 25 to 30 calls a day from students going, I'm on the portal and all the classes that I took from you guys isn't showing up. And then we're having to navigate that. So the sooner you can get that done and just kind of get an inventory and talk to the commission and find out where you're at, the better, because it is an absolute mess and I'm not understating that. So just a little warning there. And feel free to call us. Anything that you've taken from us, we'll definitely track down and make sure you got it. So anyways, the other thing I would just say is the Code of Ethics has changed the NAR, or NAR has changed the Code of Ethics. It used to be every 2 years you had to take it. First it was 4, then it was 2, and now it's 3. Now that's for the NAR requirement, which is different than obviously the continuing ed cycle that we have for our license. Right now we're in the period of 19, 20, and 21. Everybody will be due at the end of December 31st of 21. The good thing is this will fulfill that requirement. You don't have to worry about it. Then the new cycle will start 22, 23, and 24. So you'll have to get an ethics class in during that period. They're actually talking about changing it again, possibly. We had our meetings every 6 months. All the ethics instructors, we get on with NAR and that particular department, and we talk about what's going on. A couple of interesting things that are coming out, just thought I'd let you know because it's our organization, is they're talking about making a substantial change to the Code of Ethics to now include that the Code of Ethics can be applied to members that is engaged in things like hate speech, those type of things. That's going to be a drastic, I guess, detour of how they've been administering it to date. What it's going to look like, no one knows, but I think they're going to actually vote on it here in a couple of weeks at the annual conference. So just thought I'd let you know. So, all right, let's get to it. So the Code of Ethics, a couple of things that I like always, if we're live, I always like to start out is, I actually believe this statement. This is why women live longer than men. And if you notice there, you got the 3 guys working on that condenser unit, and the 2 are balancing the guy that's stepping out on the ledge there. 2 women would not do, or 3 women would not do this. They would get scaffolding and do it the right way and have harnesses and everything. So, but the point is the Code of Ethics in the end is all about your final decision. And there's consequences for your decision one way or another. And the Code of Ethics is there to help us in the decision-making process. It gives us a standard to go by and so forth. And then at the very end, actually, of the class, there's a pretty cool matrix that I got out of the arbitration manual for the Code of Ethics that's really cool for not only agents, but as managing brokers and designated brokers. It's really neat to use that. And it does help you with processing any decision that you may be faced with when it comes to a real estate transaction. So we'll get to that in the 3rd segment. So what is ethics? Well, ethics is the professional standard that governs basically professional conduct. You know, we all of our conduct is governed by a standard. We don't go out and rob a bank because we don't want to suffer the consequences. It's against the law. If you go rob a bank, you end up in jail. So the law is the standard. Maybe you don't Maybe you don't lie or you don't steal because you believe in the 10 Commandments. It's your religious belief. So the Bible is your standard. So we all have different standards, whether we choose them or not. They're there, that govern our conduct. The code of ethics is one of those standards. It is something that we use that governs our conduct, just like license law is, and RESPA and all the other laws that we have to comply with. So that's one thing. The other thing is it regulates, or at least it's supposed to regulate, conduct between members, the conduct between the licensee and the general public, and then the conduct between the licensee and the clients. Doesn't always happen. The code of ethics is really well written. I actually downloaded or printed a copy of it. It's very professional. It's well written. It's probably one of the better ones in the professional industries that I've seen. But in the administration of it, there's a lot of inherent problems. Every state is different. Every local board that is in charge of administering the code of ethics, everyone kind of does it different in that who they choose to go after and not. And we're going to talk more about that as well. It's not evenly enforced upon its members, and it can be problematic at times. And as I said, it assists with the decision-making processes that we're faced with, and then ultimately it provides accountability. So if there is a complaint that's filed, then there is a mechanism for accountability. One other thing I want, before we actually start into this, is understand one of the points of us being required to take ethics. And you kind of got to go back to the early 2000s. Probably 2005 or 6, there was a national advertising that was going all over the radio and television. And I remember it pretty distinctly, actually. And it said, "Realtors adhere to a strict code of ethics." That was display. It was being, all over the TV screens for a couple, 3 or 4 weeks. They had to pull it. NAR had to pull the ads, because what they found is about 40 to 45% of all the members, and at that time there was like 800,000 members, about 40 or 45% of the members had never even taken the code of ethics, and most didn't even know we had a code of ethics. And what they found out was local boards are required to do orientation, where you get that, initial ethics training, but a lot of the local boards weren't doing it. They were providing waiver mechanisms when they weren't supposed to be. So they actually pulled it because their statement was false. So then they went from not only having then they said, well, we got to take it every 4 years. And then something interesting happened. Gallup, about every 10 years, puts out a words and phrase list. And they literally go out and they survey about 1 million consumers throughout the United States. And they basically take different words and phrases and professions, and people rank them. And then they put it into a list and they publish it. And 2019 was the last time they did it. Well, what they found back in 2009 and 10 is the term realtor did very well. It was in the top 25. The general public perceived realtors as highly trained professionals. Big company names, familiar names, like some of the franchise names, thought of as very professional. But the term real estate agent, just generically, was 1 above drug dealer and 4 below Fidel Castro, for those of you old enough to remember who he was. So they went into this data mining. How did this happen? And what they found is the general public had no idea that there's a difference between a realtor and a non-realtor that's a licensed agent. That was the first thing. And at that time, the time of the survey, it was about 60% of all licensees across the United States were not realtor members. The other part of it the general public that was answering those questions, their perception of the industry was based on their interaction with one agent, good, bad, or indifferent. That formed their opinion on the industry. And oh, by the way, we're all real estate agents. So then the NAR said, we got to change that perception. We're going to do it through education. And there came the requirement to take ethics every 4 years. Then they upped it to every 2 years. And then because some of the bigger states that are out there, for their continuing ed cycle is actually 3 years instead of 2, they decided to vote 2 years ago to make it every 3. So that's kind of the history of why we have to take the code of ethics every 3 years. The other thing is they're really pushing the professional standards, the pathways to professionalism. It's kind of the sister of the code of ethics. And as instructors, we've kind of been required to incorporate the two, and we're going to get both of them here in this particular class. So it all starts with this. We're going to start with the pathways to professionalism, because that is a standard that governs our conduct, and the code of ethics can hold us accountable to that standard. And professionalism is the standard, professional conduct is the actions. And it basically, if you were to break it down into 4 buckets, the standard under the code of ethics, the standard under the pathways of professionalism is 4. Responsibility. Take responsibility for your own actions. You know, what did your parents always tell you? That if you got busted lying, fess up to it, because if you lied about it, you were going to get in worse trouble. Or if you got in trouble for something, make sure that you take responsibility for your own action. And that's basically the first thing in this business. Take responsibility for your own actions. And you know, I'll be the first one to admit, early in my career, I screwed up some big stuff. I remember one time where I forgot, we were negotiating back and forth. There was counter offers after counter offer. I actually just simply forgot to put in $4,800 worth of seller concessions. I had 2 choices at that point. Once it was discovered and after the contract was agreed to, I could have lied and I could have said, no, remember, through the conversation, we decided to remove that so your offer would be accepted. And I could have done that, and maybe it would have went to closing, but that perception of that individual, my client, right away would have been, okay, slick Willie, crook, you know, those type of things. So the perception of the industry, her perception of me would have been bad, but also the perception of the entire industry, irregardless of having actual interaction with my client or not. Or we kind of went the other way and said, listen, I screwed it up. I left it out. And just about every penny of that commission, including the broker side, ended up paying for those seller concessions. Now the perception of our industry is different. The point is individual actions impact the entire community at large. And it only takes one person to get something on video and it goes all over social media and it totally destroys the perception of the industry. And that's really part of the crux of the education, is pointing out that, yeah, your client may be okay with it, you may be okay with it, how you dress, those type of things, you might be okay with it, your client might be okay with it, but it's impacting everybody else. But taking responsibility is the first bucket of professionalism. Number 2 is standards of work. This is where we have a habit of, you know, working effectively with other people, using or displaying high quality standards. I hate these 2 words actually in the industry, where we have to remind people that we're honest and we have integrity. But that's also part of the package as well. And people don't want to hear it; they want to see it in action. And I'm not talking about the one or 2 people that you will never satisfy, and no matter how great of a deal you got them, no matter how much commission you saved them, they're gonna, you know, they're always going to think you're a crook. We're talking about the majority, and that's why, by the way, I never do deals with friends and family, because they always think you screwed them. So unless you don't like them. My mom has a daughter that I would do business with, but that's about it. Appearance. So appearance is absolutely the hottest topic when we go to our every 2 years we got to go to ethics training, and as instructors. What is appropriate? I'm going to kind of open it up here. A couple of people here. What is appropriate dress for the real estate professional and real estate agent? Is it okay to wear jeans during a showing? Give me a thumbs up if you think that's okay.
Is it okay? It's okay in today's world.
Okay. How many would disagree? Give me a thumbs down or chime in. How many of you say no?
Being no one responded, I'd say if you go back to Kennedy or some of the other years, Ronald Reagan, you would never wear jeans as a presidential candidate.
Right.
Today, they're wearing jeans with the sport coat all the time. And they need to do
Right.
that
Yep.
probably to meet the audience's like.
True. That is absolutely true.
Jeans and a blazer is very, very.
Go ahead, Gloria.
Jeans and a blazer is very normal. I mean, it's still professional. I don't see anything wrong with it. Typically, I don't wear jeans, but I mean, if you dress it up and try and make it look presentable and professional, then I think jeans are okay.
Well, there's a lot of,
For a showing, not for a listing appointment. I wouldn't do that for a listing appointment.
well, there's a lot of parameters. I mean, if
Right.
you're dealing with the farmer, you're going to wear bib overalls, you're going to wear nice jeans with a blazer, or you wear jeans with holes in them. I mean, and where is, I mean, is it a industrial site that's dirty? I mean, there's a lot of parameters that you have to consider for each one.
Sure.
I
Right.
totally agree with that. The discussion happens is there's no one size that fits all when it comes to your dress. But here's one of the issues that we have to guard against, though. When I was a managing broker, I got one of those calls that I never wanted to get a call on, and that is the seller called and said, we packed up our entire family of 6 and 4 dogs to move across the street into the park, and it's 110 degrees for a showing. And I'm not sure if the property is being robbed or if it's being showed, because the agent showed up and construction garb with drywall dust everywhere, and so did his brother, who was the client. And so the client's okay with it, the agent's okay with it, but that, I was put in a position as a managing broker to either throw that other agent under the bus, which I didn't know the agent, or defend them. And either way, it was a lose-lose. And that's kind of the argument or the premise that I like to go along. And everything that everybody said is absolutely true. But it's never okay to look like a slob. It's never okay to show up and you just left from the gym. And yes, your client is your brother or your sister, and you both are working out. Now you're going to go to show that house. But remember, there's a listing agent there. There is a seller that they represent. They have an opinion of the industry. There's nanny cams. In this case, this person was across the street, and their perception of the industry was really tainted that day, and it sucked. And so the only thing I would say is just remember that your actions and how you dress and the things you do not only impact you directly, but it impacts everybody. You're going to find that is the overwhelming story of this class, is the idea that you represent the industry first and then everybody else second. Because if you represent the industry first and you do it in the right way, it's impossible not to represent your client. And so it's just an exercise to make you think about things. If you're going to go show an industrial property, yeah, think about how you're going to dress and what's appropriate and what's not. So it's interesting because this happens a lot. The other thing I will tell you about appearance is there's a lot of misconceptions out there. For example, the millennials don't like people that wear a suit and a tie. Actually, there's a lot of studies that say they don't really care if you wear a suit and tie, but they're also comfortable in somebody that's wearing jeans. And so a lot of agents justify wearing jeans because, millennials, they're more comfortable with that and they don't want the suit and tie, when it's not really the case. The other thing I would tell you, this is an interesting spin we're starting to see. Gloria, you mentioned about definitely on a listing appointment dressing a certain way. Make sure that if you're going to dress in a suit and a tie for that $1 million house, you need to do the same thing for that $45,000 house. Not only is it the right thing to do, but now fair housing people are getting involved, and it could be a potential fair housing violation. It's the same with your buyers to a lesser extent, though. So that's something to keep in mind, particularly in those areas where income is a protected class, which it's not here, but that's what we're starting to see on the fair housing front. The last one is communication. Boy, this one gets us all into trouble. What's the problem with email and text? Anybody? What's the problem?
There's definitely a lack of communication. It's not the same as verbal, because there was, when I just closed the deal, oh my gosh, the wife they were confused because the husband was talking to her over the phone and I was doing text with him, and they accepted it, but down the road they said, well, if we could have got more, we would have countered it. So it's just not clear communication. It's just everywhere. That's what I think.
That's
Just-
awesome. Absolutely
clear.
correct. The other thing is, remember with communication, the way you presented something and the way you thought that maybe your client received your message is not at all the way they received it. They maybe were offended by it because they're rationalizing in their brain that they're digging on me, when in fact it was the opposite. I think communication in writing is important for certain things, and I think we all know what those things are, but it's not okay to do it when, especially in time sensitive things or things that are sensitive in nature. The other thing I would tell you, because this is starting to happen, if you're going to be unprofessional in any way, first of all, don't be, but if you are, never put it in writing. The Real Estate Commission recently, they nailed somebody because of professional communication. In fact, what happened was the client, it was a seller, that got very, very verbal in an email to the agent. In fact, it even went down, there was racial epithets and stuff. The seller got very, very ugly. But the agent hit reply and responded in kind. So the client filed a complaint with the Real Estate Commission, and the Real Estate Commission agreed and said, the agent has a duty and a standard to follow, that they have to be professional, and this is unprofessional conduct. And so those things do happen. So be aware that if anybody turns you in for one of your real estate, or for one of your emails or your texts, you can be held accountable to it. So if you're going to go down that road, make sure that you do the phone call. Don't put anything like that in writing. So just thought I'd put that out there. But these are the 4 buckets of the professional standard, or what we call the pathways to professionalism. Now, I'm going to go into probably finish out this particular segment, the first segment. Again, this is the pathways of professionalism. This is part of the ethics bucket. And the first one is, you and I as realtors, we owe respect to the public. And this is kind of the summary of the things that the Code of Ethics and the organization as a whole, they expect us to do. Number 1 is follow the golden rule. Now, follow the golden rule is basically treat people the way you want to be treated. That's basic. I know there's some variations of the definition, but that's the standardized definition today. Always disclose your professional status. Some of these you kind of scratch your head and go, why is this even an issue? I mean, why wouldn't you? What's the big deal to disclose your professional status? But you'd be surprised how many agents don't want to do it for whatever reason. Promise only what you can deliver. That's kind of a big one. And I know for those of you that are managing brokers, I'm sure that, or have been, I'm sure you've had those phone calls. Well, you know, your agent promised to do an open house every Sunday until it closed if I gave them the listing. 3 days after it went up for sale, you got a contract that's put together, 6-week closing, and all of a sudden the agent stops doing the open house. It's not so much that they're not doing the open house, but they promised to do it, and then they didn't communicate with the seller. That agent could have simply said, hey, listen, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I feel real confident this is totally gonna close. It's a cash deal. Would you be okay if I didn't do the open houses? I promise to do it, and if you want me to do it, I will. But what do you say? You know, so there's that lack of communication. They just simply stop doing it. That impacts the perception of the industry. Only promise what you can deliver. Respond to information and inquiries promptly. Now, promptly means in a reasonable amount of time. This is an interesting one as well. This also goes to not only presenting your offer to your clients, but also getting back to the other agents, whether they're members or not. It's not okay if an agent calls you and asks a question about your listing and it takes you 3 days to return the phone call. I think probably one of the biggest issues that we see in the industry is when people just go on vacation and they don't tell anybody, and they're in Cancun and they have no cell phone service and they're gone forever. Or at least it seems like it when you're trying to get a hold of them. So you have a duty and a responsibility to be available to respond to informational inquiries that you get not only from agents, but from buyers and sellers as well. Call and explain canceled or delayed showings. That's another one. And what we did here is kind of taken all three of these buckets, respect for the public, respect for property and each other, you're going to find that they're all directly real estate related, in that these are the high points that we took out of the annual survey that the realtors take every single year. And these are the items that we bitch about the most. And so, or at least we say we're victims of. And so we put it into this presentation. So respond to information. We already talked about that. Call and explain canceled showings and delayed showings. This is an interesting one because we have a duty that if you make an appointment and you can't make it, you need to let somebody know. It's not okay just not to show up. Again, that seller, they're going to get up and take off for an hour, and they have a right. I mean, that's disrespectful. Okay. Here's the other thing too. This happened to me as a managing broker. And this was another one of those situations where it was just awful. So and I mean this in the kindest way, but every one of us has a hit list of 5 or 6 real estate agents that we work with in this community that we hope we never have to do business with. They're just not nice people. They are rude. They're belligerent. You all know it's true. I have one. Everybody has it. There's 5 or 6 of them. You just hope you never have to do deals with. Many times what happens is they get so, you know, if you have a new agent that isn't expecting it, or they just don't have thick skin, or they don't understand it, that can cause problems. And in my case, what happened is, had a new agent that had a listing, or was working with a buyer, and the listing agent was one of those agents that you never want to do business with. The buyer was terrified of the listing agent. So, or the buyer's agent was terrified of the listing agent. So the buyers had to cancel. They had to work late. The buyer agent knew that when they called the listing agent to cancel, this listing agent was going to berate them and beat them up and just not be nice. So the buyer agent called the listing agent and said, "We can't do our showing tonight. I'm sorry, because my buyer got into a car wreck." The only problem was the buyer and the seller actually knew each other. So what do you think happened? Seller calls buyer, "Hey, everything okay?" "Yeah, why?" "Well, I heard you got in a car wreck." And yeah, it ended up being a car wreck all the way around. And on one hand, it's never right for the buyer's agent to do something like that. But on the other hand, the situation would have never, happened had the listing agent been nice. And so we are faced with those situations, whether the listing agent's nice or not. We still have a duty and a responsibility to make sure that we call and cancel those appointments. Same thing goes for delayed showings. And this scenario also, or this example also goes to that fact that now we have a buyer and a seller that now know the truth, and they have a bad reflection and a bad perception of the industry. And again, it just goes to that one individual creating a scenario where it tarnishes the industry reputation. Meet deadlines or explain why you can't. Leave business cards when appropriate. That's an interesting one, because not every part of the country you can leave business cards legally. They consider that going behind the sign. In our area, I think it's customary and it's ordinary, and I think we should do it. If you don't want to spend the 3/4 of 1 cent to leave that card behind, then get out of the business. That's kind of my opinion. The other one is never criticize a property in front of others. Why is that so important? Anybody want to chime in on that one? No? All right. Well, the reason is you don't know who knows who, right? So you have a property, or you have a listing agent. This actually another scenario where the listing agent was actually at the bar. It was about 1:30 in the morning. He was hammered and criticizing the property. It wasn't his listing, but he was, "Yeah, I showed this house over on Main Street, and man, what a bunch of dirt merchants. I went in there and blah, 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 blah." Well, the bartender ended up knowing exactly who that seller was. Not a good situation.
But the other thing is, if you're being critical of something, they know you may be critical of their property someday, or that's how you'd handle it. Because if you're kind of loose about it, you'd think, well, I don't know what they'd say about me or my property.
That's a great point, because you don't know if that bartender maybe is thinking about selling their house. There's no way they're going to use that guy now. Now, understand this. I don't want to, there's an appropriate time to criticize a property. If you, when you're giving honest feedback to your seller and there's going to be criticism, that's legitimate. make sure it's packaged correctly and appropriately. I'm just talking about the loose lips where people are just, and the other thing is it's not okay is we see it all the time on Facebook and social media where there's an agent that's taken a photo of a house they're showing and they'll make a comment like, yeah, I guess the seller doesn't want to sell their house. They left their dirty laundry. Look at those nasty underwear that's on the floor. They could have picked it up. That's not okay either. And we see those type of things all the time on social media. In fact, it's actually illegal to take a photo while you're doing a showing and do that, but without the permission of the listing broker. But it's just an example of it's not okay to do because there's ramifications. Here's another one. Ring the doorbell and announce yourself when you're showing. That's actually a safety issue. And you never know what you're going to walk in on. I remember early in my career, I went into I just assumed that the listing agent had made they made the appointment. I walked in and a Rottweiler literally grabbed the front end of my pants. Another inch and I would have never had kids. If I would have knocked on the door, the dog would have started barking and then I would have known. I haven't had this happen to me, but I know agents where they walked in on people taking a shower, those type of things. Not dressed because the showing service or the listing agent didn't make the showing. Again, that develops a perception. If that seller is a victim, that's developing a perception of the industry that we're not professional. We talked about professional appearance and driving a clean car. I just put drive a clean car in there. If you're doing relocation, you got to have a clean car. It's just the way it is. And then communicate clearly and professionally, and we talked a lot about that. The other duty we have is respect for the property itself. Properly scheduling inspections. This is an interesting one, and it's more generational, but use sidewalks and take shoes off when appropriate. But it's interesting, particularly in the older generation, it's very disrespectful to get out of the car and then cut across the lawn to the front door to get the lockbox key out, right? It's okay if you walk up the sidewalk, go up the stairs, you get the lockbox key out, and at some point you walk the yard and look at the flower beds and stuff, but there's something about it that's very disrespectful. And it's not really a small number of people. It's typically, the statistics show the 65 and older. When this course was first developed, it would have been 55 and older. This was developed back in 2008. But still, we're always looking for shaving off the tangents there. The less people that don't like us, the better. And that's actually a cultural thing in many cultures as well. Another one is no food or drink during the showing. A lot of managers have had to deal with a lot of issues because little Johnny wouldn't shut up and mom put a red sucker or a grape sucker in his mouth, and then there's grape all over the walls. I know you guys know this, but these are the things that really have given us a bad name, and that's why we cover them in this class. It's your responsibility for everyone that you show the property to. It is not okay to open up the door and say, go on in and have at it, or loan out your lockbox key. That happens way more than you think too. You'll see at the top on the right-hand side, I put this in here. It's no hanky-panky in the house during a showing. I can't tell you, it's kind of interesting. I took over Randall School from Susan Geschwender in 2015. I'm kind of like every managing broker's managing broker. When a managing broker needs some advice on something, they call me, and that's fine. But I was surprised at how many phone calls I've gotten where I have a listing or I have an agent or whatever, and they got caught having sex in the listing. They, most of the time it's where they're cheating on their spouse or their girlfriend, and they use a showing, or I'm going to preview the home for a relo, and then a nanny cam busts them. So it doesn't happen a lot, but I bet I get that phone call about 3 or 4 times a year at the school. How would you handle it? Or, what does the code say? Or what does license law say about it? Those type of things. And then it's either usually from a managing broker or a seller that calls and says, my broker said there's nothing I can do about it. What do you say? Those type of things. Leave the property as you found it. That should be a question. And this is a legitimate question. In this area, how do you leave a property after you do a showing? Anybody?
I leave it like I found it unless they tell me to turn the lights off.
Thank you. Gloria, you want to add anything to it?
You leave it.
Nope.
If you clean up your mess, And if you make it a mess, like your flyers, and all that stuff, you make sure you take everything you brought and leave it exactly the way you found it.
Yes, exactly. And the one thing I just want to say is in the MLS, we have a showing instruction box, and that's there for a reason. Maybe the seller has a special need, a certain allergy, you never know. And so there may be specific instructions in that showing instruction box. Please look at that as a buyer's agent. Otherwise, you leave it the way you found it, but you want to make sure that you leave it the way that the listing agent tells you to if they put instructions. Now, hopefully the showing service will tell you that, but they don't always tell you that, and neither does the listing agent or their admin assistant. So again, it's always a good idea to check that MLS. Again, if the seller has some very specific instructions and it's not happening, and they're getting angry, frustrated, then they're going to vent on social media, not only about their listing agent, but the industry and everybody else. And it just, yeah, you get the point there. No chewing, excuse me, no chewing or smoking on the property. I think we know that one. Here's one that actually is more frequent than you think as far as calls. So what about using the toilet? Little Johnny's got to pee. Now what? Johnny's got to pee. Don't send him out to the bush. There's neighbors, right? The point I want to make here is, because it happens, you as an agent, you're responsible for everything that happens during that showing. So if little Johnny went to the bathroom and he watered the wall and the sink and everything else, yeah, it is your responsibility to make sure it's cleaned up. Now, whether mom or dad does it or whoever, or you, it's got to be done. So just FYI, if little Johnny goes to the bathroom, it's probably a good idea to swing by the bathroom before you before you take off. And then the last one is respect for realtors. And unfortunately, I think one of my biggest criticisms of this industry is the way we treat each other. We really don't need to be. And other professional industries, they don't treat each other to the level that we do as far as treating each other bad. You know, two lawyers can hack it out in court, represent their client, and then they're playing golf together that afternoon, right? They keep it professional. We typically tend not to do that. At least there is a pool of agents that don't do that, and we really need to change that tenor. So what about respect for realtors? What does your colleague, what should they expect from you? Number one is follow the golden rule. Number two, you have a duty as a real estate professional or a realtor to protect the reputation in the industry. I mentioned that earlier. And NAR's position is if you protect the reputation of the industry as a whole, it's really impossible to not protect the reputation and not represent your client and your company if you think of it from that perspective. Follow the code of ethics, communicate facts, responds to calls and those type of things promptly. I do want to point something out with that bullet point. Again, as a managing broker, I would get calls where an agent would call and say, I'm trying to get a hold of your agent. I finally started asking, okay, how long ago did you call? Many times they would say, well, I just hung up. Well, give them an hour or so. Maybe they're in a closing. After a couple hours, I get it. But, you know, I started asking, how long ago did you try to get a hold of them? And many times they would say, oh, I just hung up the phone and you guys are a bunch of X, Y, and Z and all that. So that's not okay either. Again, disparaging comments about your a property or a client is not okay, but it's not okay to have disparaging competitors either, even if it's true. There's a proper place to vent those things. It's not out on social media, Facebook, and other things. Communicating property issues with the listing agent immediately. You have a duty that if you're going and doing a showing and there's an issue that you see, then make sure that you communicate it. And sometimes, and this actually happened to me. So about, I don't know, 12 years ago or so, I had an admin assistant, and every day she would go through all the new listings that came up on the MLS. One day she starts laughing, and I said, what's so funny? And she goes, look at this photo. So it happened to be a listing agent that was on my list of agents I hope to never talk to again. She's no longer in the business, but she really was just not a nice person. And it was a really nice house, high dollar, and they had professional photos, which 12 years ago was kind of unheard of. However, like photo 3, beautiful shot of this awesome bathroom, but you could see clearly a big turd in the toilet. That's going all over MLS. And at that time, that's when they just started issuing the feeds to like realtor.com and all of that, the RETS feeds. Now, that's going all over the United States. You have two choices. You can do the right thing, and the right thing is to do what? Anybody? What's the right thing?
Tell the agent.
Yeah, even though I despise this agent, and I'll be honest, I wanted nothing more than just to let it go because I knew somebody was going to run with it. But that's not the right thing to do. So we called the agent and said, hey, just FYI. And she was actually very, grateful for it. But you had two choices as a real estate professional. You can either call and tell them about it, or number two, say nothing, or even worse, hey, check this out, and you post it on Facebook or Twitter, and you're basically sharing it with everybody. The industry standard says no. We have to, protect the reputation of the industry. The right thing to do is call the agent. If the agent doesn't do anything about it, then that's on them, not you. Use appropriate, or don't use inappropriate language. Careful what you email, and then notify the listing agent of wrong information on the MLS. If you know that there's something that's wrong on the MLS, be polite about it, be professional, but please do let them know. And don't accuse them of anything. That's another issue that has, hey, your listing over here is wrong or whatever. Just say, hey, I thought I seen an inconsistency. This is what I noticed. What you have on the MLS may be totally appropriate. I just thought I would bring it to your attention. So those are the three buckets of the professional standards, or what we call the pathways to professional, that are now incorporated into the code of ethics. So we're going to take our first break. Actually, we're going to come back at 1 o'clock. So we got about 13 minutes or so. But when we come back, we're actually going to start diving into the code itself and talking about the different articles and the standards of practice. So we all doing okay? Give me a thumbs up if you're doing okay. All right, good. Let's come back at 1 o'clock and then we'll pick up. Fair enough? I keep meaning to update the slide and I didn't, but we do need to talk about it before we move into the code of ethics, is nanny cams. And it is no joke right now. So we're having issues where basically the seller has some type of nanny cam. A nanny cam can be a clock, it can be anything. It actually functions as a clock. It's a really good clock, and it's a really good video and audio capture device. And you have to understand that, I think, as a real estate professional, that anytime you are going into a listing appointment, or anytime you are showing a buyer a house, you need to assume you're being videotaped and audio taped. Especially the buyer's agents, you need to make sure that you're counseling your buyers that, hey, let's walk through, let's keep our conversations kind of to ourselves, don't say too much, and be real honest why. Just say, listen, there could be a nanny cam here, and all our conversations are going to be recorded. We'll get into the legalities of it in a minute, but you don't want your client to give anything away. If they're going through the house going, oh my gosh, I love this place, I got to have it, I don't care what the price is, then you jeopardized your bargaining position. If your client, or you're going through the property going, man, what a bunch of dirt merchants that live here, these people are icky, nasty, that's also going to jeopardize your client's bargaining position. So we got to really counsel our buyers. Now, the legalities of whether a seller can do it. So in the state of Nebraska, they split video and audio up differently. So on video, a seller can videotape just about anything without anybody's permission, except they can't have it in those rooms that's reasonably expected to have privacy, like they couldn't put anything in a bathroom or potentially a bedroom. That's a little more gray in the bedroom, but definitely not a bathroom, as long as it doesn't have any audio to it. So if it's just video, they can videotape whatever they want with the exception of the bathroom. If there's an audio component to that video, or they're just simply recording the audio, then one of the two parties, or one of the three parties that are there that are actually in the party. So if it's you and your buyer and you're going through this house, either you or your buyer has to know that your conversations are being recorded. The fact that the seller knows and is watching remotely, that is not doesn't meet the standard under the statute. That's important to know from a listing agent point of view so you can properly advise your clients. We're really seeing more and more of this where sellers are calling brokers going, this happened and that happened, and then they ask, well, how did you know that? Well, I videotaped everything and I heard it. And now what's happening is some of the agents are starting to fight back. We actually have 2 agents in the state of Nebraska right now that have filed criminal charges or went down and did a police report for criminal charges against sellers for doing that. So I thought I'd put that out there because it is rampant. This ain't an isolated incident anymore. So anybody have any questions on that?
Paul, does the Ring doorbell count too, since on the outside of the house? Because that seems to be the most popular one.
It is. In Fred Hoppy's position on it is the courts haven't ruled on it and it's gray. So assume from a practice point of view that it does count. That was his advice because I called him and asked that specific question. Definitely in the house, on the porch, it could be. And then he was like, what kind of porch is it? Is it a covered porch? Is it 3-season porch and all of that? So anybody else? Perfect. All right. So let's get in this segment. We're actually going to get into the code of ethics. And there's one thing that we have to talk about right out of the chute. And in the code of ethics, specifically, this comes from the arbitration manuals. The code of ethics only applies to realtors that are conducting real estate related activities, which is a little bit different than some of the other professionals that are out there, professional industries. For example, if you're a CPA and you belong to their association and they have a code of ethics, if you go out and get a DUI, not only do you have to deal with the legal ramifications, but then they can bring you up on charges, if you will, within their own code of ethics system. We don't have the same thing yet in the code of ethics. And the reason I say yet is this may be changing as early as next month. I briefly talked about this in the opening statement, and they are looking at introducing some standard of practices, which is in the code, to hold realtors accountable for things like publishing hate speech, having certain positions that they publicly put out there that's inconsistent with what the association has. They were very vague at our meeting, like examples. So I specifically threw out an example of, well, let's say that someone is posting racist things. I mean, let's say they're a member of the KKK and they put that out on Facebook. Under the current code, there's really nothing that they can do because it's not in a direct real estate related activity. Would that then apply with the new change? And they actually would not answer it. They kind of dodged the question. So I just bring this up because I think that given in today's world and where it's going and the sensitivity to things, that we may be seeing some substantial changes. So maybe for those of you that have taken this now a dozen times, knowing that you hear the same thing over and over and over again, because nothing juicy ever happens with the code of ethics, we might actually have some changes the next time that you take this class. So I wanted to point it out. All right, so the code of ethics. The code of ethics is a national code. It's there for realtor members. And this is kind of the outline of what we're going to cover. We'll go through the preamble. The code has 17 articles. And then Article 1 through 9 is the duties that we owe our clients and customers. Articles 10 through 14 is the duties under the code that we owe the general public. And then 15 through 17 is what we owe each other as members, our colleagues. And then within each one of these articles is what we call standards of practices, or sometimes referred to as an SOP. So here is the preamble. I've kind of just paraphrased it here, but under the preamble, there are some expectations that you and I have as members. We have a duty and a responsibility to maintain and improve standards. We have a duty and a responsibility to show a certain common respect and integrity amongst each other, our fellow realtors. We have to treat them, the golden rule, if you will. We have a duty to remain informed on current issues and to help regulatory agencies eliminate bad practices. And this is an interesting one right here. It's in the middle. It says that you and I as realtors, we must bring to the attention of the local board or association that's tasked with adjudicating the ethics process of willful conduct of another member. It's actually an ethics violation to not report somebody. And this is where I said at the beginning, where the code is great and it's written well, but there definitely needs to be some improvements in the administration of it, because no one does this, and I'm just as guilty as everybody else. We all know somebody that is willfully breaking the code. We all do at some point in our career, but we do not turn people in. Brokers won't do it because brokers are in the business of growing their business. They're in the business of recruiting, and they don't want to get that stigma that, this person, this broker turned you in, so then that hampers their growth prospects. Agents don't want to do it because they want other people to do it, and they just don't want to mess with it. It takes time. And then, quite frankly, to be honest with you, the processes, depending on the state that you're operating in, they're not all cracked up to be either. I actually tried to file an ethics complaint against a real estate professional, realtor in Ohio. And after 3 years of trying, she finally got out of the business, and I was never able to, because the state association was tasked with administering the code of ethics in Ohio, and they insisted because I wasn't a member of the Ohio State Association, I couldn't file a complaint, which is absolutely not true. But that's just what you see. I mean, even down in Lincoln at Nebraska's Realtors Association, they do okay, but there's always so much turnover with staff. Sometimes it's a year behind, and then it's been too long and they can't file. Excuse me. So there's even some problems here in Nebraska. The other thing it says is we must avoid attempting to gain an unfair advantage over another member. We're going to discuss that in Article 15. And then refrain from making unsolicited comments about another member. We discussed that already. And then lo and behold, follow the golden rule. So that's kind of the preamble, and everything in the preamble is codified within an article or an SOP within the code itself. So let's go to Article 1. That's where it all starts. I don't mean to insult anybody's intelligence here, but about 2 or 3 years ago, I put in client, customer, and agent. I know you all know what this is, but you'd be shocked at how many people would come up at break and go, what's the difference between a client and a customer? So a client, you are the agent or the licensee. The client is the person that you owe those 6 fiduciary duties to. You represent them. You're looking out for their best interest. A customer is someone that you are working with. Maybe it's a double bubble. You represent the seller, and the buyer is your customer. That buyer came in on an open house, and they are a customer, meaning you don't owe them those fiduciary duties. You still got to treat them with honesty. You can't lie to them and those type of things, but you don't give them advice. I know you knew that, but I just decided to start doing that. So, all right, these are the SOPs. There's many more SOPs within each article, and we're not going to talk about all of them. I'm just going to talk about the ones that I guess that we see the most in the business. And these are the ones in Article 1 we're going to talk about here. So Article 1 basically says when you're representing a buyer, any client, whether it's a buyer, seller, landlord, or a tenant, realtors, we pledge ourselves to promote their best interest. That mirrors license law. We have that obligation and duty to get them the best deal, to represent them to our best and most capacity. That's basically the premise of Article 1. Now, there is a couple of SOPs I want to talk about. This is where we get into the nuts and bolts of the Code of Ethics. Standard of Practice 1.3. In attempting to secure a listing, the realtor shall not deliberately mislead the owner as to the market value. This is a great discussion because we all know a couple of agents in our sphere that we know that try to buy the listing. What I mean by that is that, you go and do an appointment for the listing and the market value is $200,000, and you say, you tell the truth. It's your house, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, is worth $200,000. The next agent that comes in behind you says, no, your house is worth $250,000. Well, most of the time that seller is going to gravitate towards that agent that said $250,000. And then interestingly enough, that agent will get a 1-year contract. and then beat them down on price reductions over that year until it gets to the market value, and then it sells. That is a business plan for some agents. Not a lot, but there are some, and we all know a couple of them that buy the listing. The reason this is important is there's a distinction between what is an ethics violation and what it's not. If you went into that listing appointment and you said, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, your house is worth 200, and it's legitimately, that's the market value based on the comps. And they said, okay, great, but I want to try 225 or 250. And you say, great, no problem, we can do that. That is not an ethics violation, nor is it a license law, because you were honest about the value, and the seller decided to choose a higher listing price, and you went along with it. And that the other way is an ethics violation, and quite frankly, a license law violation if you mislead them as to the market value. But here's where you guys need to be real careful from a listing broker perspective. If you take an overpriced listing, do not do dual agency. So if you agree to take that seller's listing at 250 and you know that it's 50 grand overpriced, there is no way under license law or the code that you can adequately represent a client buyer. You can work with a buyer, but they must be a customer. So keep that in mind. If you take those, you take an overpriced listing, and we all do at some point, but just keep that in mind. Standard practice 1.6. Realtors shall submit offers and counteroffers objectively and as quickly as possible. I bring this one up because there's always the allegation that the other agent, the listing agent, didn't submit the offer, or they're holding back the offer for other offers to come in. And reality says that that's true, but it doesn't necessarily always be, it's not 100% true all the time, like the allegations go. But what is your obligation under the code and license law that they mirror? And that is, you have to notify your seller or your client is as soon as possible, soon as reasonably possible, of that offer or counteroffer. Now, if your client, for example, a seller says, listen, I understand you have this offer, I'm not going to entertain any offers until Tuesday at 5. That's their choice. They can do that. And your obligation then is to pass that on to everybody that did submit the offer. I know the buyer's agents are not going to like that, but you're not doing anything wrong if you're being honest about it. And your seller is the one who made that decision. And it's even okay if you give them advice on that. If you say, listen, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I think we got some action here, and I think if we wait 24 hours or 48 hours, we may get some action here. My recommendation to you is we wait, but it's your call. If that seller gives you a thumbs up, you're okay to do that. I know the buyer side, it sucks because you have an expiration date, but that's the way the cookie crumbles. One other thing with that is, there is a misconception out there that when you submit a purchase agreement, that the expiration date and time is the date and time that the seller has to respond. That is absolutely not true. It simply means that as of that date and time, that purchase offer is expired. So just keep that in mind. That argument is, I get that call all the time at the school from agents. So-and-so did this and they didn't respond in time, and well, they don't have to. So any questions on that from anybody?
Yes.
Paul, I have a question.
Go ahead.
So in going back to your example of the house is worth 200,000, the client says that they want to list it for 225. Would you recommend there being documentation or having an addendum to that listing agreement or something to kind of CYA for the agent, so that they don't get caught up in, them saying down the road, oh, well,
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
I do, and that's a great point, and absolutely. Anytime you can document anything, I think you should. In fact, I think it's a good idea to put your comparables that you used in your folder or in your file if you're using an online portal. I actually seen one time where an agent, his first name was Frank. He'd been in the business, I don't know how many years, 60 years. He actually wrote it on a napkin. Just said, hey, I just want to, he was at the house and he took an overpriced listing, and they just wanted to let you know that in my professional opinion, your house is about $50,000 overpriced. And they signed it and he put it in there. If you can document that, I don't know that you necessarily have to do it on an addendum, but certainly on a disclosure, an email, something where you can prove that you notified your clients of that. Absolutely. Your broker will thank you when the issue becomes an issue. And when is an issue an issue?
When it's an issue.
Only when it's an issue. You could do that 1,000 times and do it for 25 years. It's that one time that gets you.
Yeah, I keep that that information on every listing presentation I go to and use it for various reasons. So I agree with Paul completely. Keep that stuff.
Anybody else?
Well, I have a question regarding the expiration date.
Sure.
So you said it did not have to, if that's not the time that they have to, the seller has to respond by, but the fact of the matter is the contract has expired. So
yes,
that's what you said. So if the seller responds at 5 o'clock and it expired at 3, so what we just need, I think we've been doing, either the buyer's agent or myself will just say the expiration date is extended so that we don't have to do another contract. That's what we're supposed to do, right?
correct. Technically, you're supposed to. I would say probably 80% or 90% of the agents, they'll just have their seller accept it or their buyer accept a counteroffer and never make a reference to the fact that the counteroffer is exceeded the expiration date.
Yeah,
But
some people don't,
but you're right. The best thing to do is, hey, we're extending our offer. You write up an addendum, or what you can do it is on the other end is the seller, they respond to that counter offer, and then the buyer at that point really should acknowledge that they're they understood that it expired and that they're in agreement with the counter offer and they accept it as written. The thing is the title companies, none of the title companies call that out. None of them. So.
right. Well, I just in the past, I just see people, extending it, but really, in my belief, I just keep moving forward. I don't care about that expiration date. It means really nothing to me. If no one else is making a big, the others are right, but we're extending this expiration date, but it's not actually necessary. Am I right?
You totally broke up there. I heard nothing other than.
Okay. What I was saying is I always just move forward with it. They don't pay attention to that expiration date. Some other agents, like in the offer, they see that it's expired. They will write verbiage saying we're extending it expiration date so we can get this deal put together. But it's not really necessary. Am I right? I mean, I just move forward. As long as the signatures are coming in, that's all that matters.
Yeah. So here's the problem. If you just move, as long as you have the signatures, if let's say that you put in an offer, it expires at 3. At 5 o'clock, the seller accepts it. There is a legal argument for the buyer to say, this is not valid and binding because my offer expired.
If they want it, okay.
And they may move on to it with it all the way through to closing and at the last minute invoke that legal defense. Now, there is another argument, a legal argument to say, well, that's true, but you had knowledge at some point that the seller accepted it and you continued on with your inspections and everything else. So you implied that the contract was relevant. So the point is, as realtors, we don't want to put ourselves and our brokers and our clients in those situations in the first place. The less we have lawyers involved, the better. So going that extra mile to get the extension or acknowledge on the back end is worth its weight in gold. Because again, an issue is only an issue when it becomes an issue. And, and the other thing is, it's a good idea for the, probably your broker should have some guidelines on that. So, how they want their agents to proceed. So that may be something that Susan, you guys think about. So
Okay,
any
cool.
other questions on that? Great questions. All right, Article 1, Standard of Practice 1.7. This is really long, and I want to read through this because there's a lot of things in this particular SOP that I want to cover here. So let's just read through this here. It says, when acting as a listing broker, realtors shall. Now, the term shall means a lot of things. It means it's affirmative. You must do X, Y, and Z. So realtors shall continue to submit offers to the seller, all offers and counteroffers until closing or the execution of a lease, unless the seller has waived this obligation in writing. All right. This is one area. So you have an obligation that after it goes under contract, you have to continue to submit offers to your seller. Another thing you have to understand is this is contrary to what license law says, because in the Code of Ethics, it says that if you get it in writing from your seller to waive that obligation, that's great for the code. But under license law, you still have a requirement to submit all offers to your client, whether they accept it, whether they look at it, that's their choice, but you have an obligation to deliver it. The next part of this says, upon written request of a cooperating broker who submits an offer to the listing broker, and understand this, when they say listing broker, that extends down to the salesperson agent. So the listing broker shall provide, as soon as practical, a written affirmation to the cooperating broker stating that the offer has been submitted to the seller, or a written notification that the seller has waived the obligation to have the offer presented. So if the agent's going to follow license law here in Nebraska, that second part really shouldn't apply. But this is interesting because how many times have you had a listing agent just say, oh, your offer wasn't accepted, and you're the buyer's agent going, well, I'm not sure that they even submitted it. You can require them under the code, say, listen, under SOP 17, I want something in writing affirming one of these two things. Either you submitted it or the offer was rejected, or whatever, or not rejected, but the offer, the seller waived the obligation, which again, in Nebraska, that's not doable because of license law. So I guess if you feel that the listing agent didn't present it and you're the buyer's agent and you want a pound of flesh, you might be able to, ring up the listing agent on a violation of ethics if you want a pound of flesh. This is actually fairly new to the code within the last 4 or 5 years. So it might be something that you think about in those situations. The next part, go ahead.
So Paul, even if it's, let's say I'm the owner and you've got the listing and I say to you, hey, I'm sending you an email. I do not want to see any other offers. I've got my offer. Please don't send them to me or submit them. There's still a violation there if you don't do it.
Yeah, the commission's position is that you still have a duty under the statute that's not curable, meaning you can't waive it, that you have to at least present it. Now you can present it by email or whatever, and they don't have to open it, but yeah.
Okay, very good. That's interesting because, you're working for me and I'm directing you, hey, I don't want you, whatever. Okay.
I think the logic behind it is to prevent those dishonest agents from using that, kind of get a general agency agreement, if you will, where they just say, the seller gives me permission to select and direct only the offers I think you should get. And I'm sure some agents could get their seller to sign that. And then it opens it up for dishonest agents to take advantage of people. And I think that's the reason why they have that particular requirement.
What if I'm managing something for you and it's leased out, it's not listed, and an offer comes in? You need to still present that offer if you're managing the property. I would say, even though you don't have a listing, somebody sends you an offer on that property.
Technically, it's two separate real estate transactions. So you have a management contract that says you'll perform these duties, but you don't have a listing contract. The question is going to be now on the list side, but on the buy side, if you wrote up the offer, you represent them. You represent the buyer. You have a duty then to present it.
Right, but I manage your house, and an offer comes in. Well, it's not for sale. You told me I don't want to sell it.
Right.
I still need to send you that offer.
Number one, it would depend on the language you have in your property management agreement, because many times that's addressed in there. But technically, under license law, you could tell them, I don't represent them. I only do property management. You're going to have to take that to the seller directly. You would not have an obligation unless you have some kind of language within your property management contract, which a lot of managers do to protect just from that very thing. Certainly you would want to, but absent any language in that management contract, there is no obligation.
Okay, thank you.
All right, realtors, the third bullet there, realtors shall not be obligated to continue to market the property after the offer has been accepted. I think we all know that one. And then realtors shall recommend that sellers obtain the advice of legal counsel prior to accepting a subsequent offer, except where the acceptance is contingent upon the termination of a pre-existing contract. So here's what they're saying here. You have a house that's under contract. You're the listing agent. You get another offer that comes in and you recommend to your buyer that, hey, you can accept this, but it has to be a backup offer or it has to be contingent upon the release of that first offer. You don't have to recommend legal counsel if you're going to do it that way. But if the seller says, you know what, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to accept that second offer because I think the first offer is actually not valid anymore. What the code is saying at that point, okay, my recommendation before you accept that second offer is you need to talk to legal counsel. And here's the reasons why. I'm not an attorney. Now, if they say, hey, screw you, I'm signing it anyways, that's fine. They're responsible for their own actions. Where we get into trouble is if we don't make that recommendation, and you want that recommendation in writing. So it's a good idea to have that phone call, but it's also really a good idea to follow up with an email to them so you have some documentation that you sent that before they executed that second offer. And that actually is an issue. It's happening quite often actually with the market the way it is right now, being crazy with multi-offers. So never be afraid to recommend legal counsel in those situations. But before, the other thing, you have brokers too. For those of you that aren't brokers, that's why you have managing brokers to ask them those questions. So any questions on Article 1 at all so far?
I was just going to say something else that happened about the presenting of offers scenario. I had a situation where I represented the seller and a buyer's agent called me and said that her buyer thought that she hadn't presented the offer. And so her buyer wanted proof that she presented it and that I presented it so that she could bring that back to them. So they weren't accusing me, they were accusing them. So I guess just know that you need to present all offers because the question of did you could come from multiple parties really.
And Susan, that's a great point. Here's the other thing, guys, to remember right now, buyers are going to the seller's house and knocking on the door saying, hey, did you see my offer? And they're doing it. And it is not a one-off anymore. It is so competitive, and you all know this, but and you don't want to be that issue when it's an issue. And here's the other thing, just from a good practice point of view. If you're the listing agent and your seller turns down an offer, it's a good customer, not required, but it's a good customer service thing to have them just reject it. Even if they just write on their offer is rejected or thank you, but it's been rejected, something so that buyer's agent can go back to their client and say, I'm sorry, your offer was rejected, without the thought of this was, there was some shenanigans going on. Help the buyer's agent out as much as you can in that respect. All right, standard of practice 1.8. It says acting as agent or brokers of buyers or tenants shall submit to buyers all offers and counteroffers until acceptance, but have no obligation to continue to show the property to their clients after the offer has been accepted unless otherwise agreed to. This goes both ways. You don't have to show a listing, and you don't have to show buyers more houses after an offer has been accepted unless you had a pre-existing agreement with them that's contrary to that. All right, standard of practice 115. We're going to spend some time here. This is very important. So when we get to Article 3, 115 and 3.4, they kind of go hand in foot. So it says realtors in response, that's a trigger word. So realtors in response to inquiries from buyers or other brokers with the seller's approval shall disclose the existence of offers on the property. there is a myth out there that listing agents are required to notify buyers, potential buyers or buyers agents if they have offers in on the property that have not been agreed to yet or have not been executed. That is not true under code of ethics or under license law. In fact, it's almost the code and license law doesn't specifically say this, but the code is very specific. You cannot disclose that information without your seller's permission. So if you have 2 or 3 offers in on the property and I call you and say, hey, do you have any other offers we're thinking about writing? You actually cannot give me that information without your seller's permission. Now, I think it's a good idea, and I'm sure you probably do, but I would look at your listing agreement and I would have some just basic language in there that says that we as a broker, we have permission, you're giving us the authority to disclose multi-offer situations if we deem it to be beneficial, those type of things. Keep it very generic. That way there, your agent isn't having to go and get that permission every single time. It's carte blanche, it's in the listing contract. So you can't disclose unless you have your seller's permission. Then it goes on to say where disclosure is authorized, realtors shall also disclose, if asked, that's a trigger word, if asked, whether offers were obtained by the listing licensee or another licensee in the listing firm or by a cooperating outside broker. So if you have those 3 offers and you have permission to disclose it from your client, your seller, and a buyer's agent calls you and asks, okay, you have these 3 offers. That buyer's agent has the right to know the sources of where those clients or where those offers came from. There's a reason why this is important, and you're going to find out in Article 3 or SOP 3.4. Any questions on that one? All right, moving on to Article 2, we're going to spend about 2 seconds here. Article 2 basically says you need to disclose when it's required by state law. That's really all it says. One thing you do need to know, though, is if you are an agent and you don't disclose and they can prove it, they can actually file a license or not only a license law complaint, but also an ethics complaint for failure to comply with Article 2. Rarely see it. I think, in fact, the arbitration manual, the last time anybody actually filed in all 50 states, I think was like 1964 or something like that. So Article 3 deals with cooperation. These are the 3 SOPs we're going to key in on. Now, Article 3 generally says that we as real estate or realtors, we have an obligation to cooperate with other brokers, except when the cooperation is not in the client's best interest. Now, that is subject to interpretation, and usually that simply means when the seller deems it's not in their best interest, and there has to be documentation for that. And quite frankly, that's why we now have the clear cooperation policy that the MLS or NAR passed and the MLS implemented. Goes on to say the obligation to cooperate does not include an obligation to share commissions, fees, or otherwise compensate other brokers. Essentially what Article 3 says, if you're going to be a member, you have to cooperate with other members. You have to allow showings. You don't have to pay a cooperating broker commission, but you just can't be a member so you can get your listings put into the MLS and then deny all showings by other members. That's what Article 3, but there is there's no requirement for cooperating or for listing brokers to pay cooperating broker commissions. And in fact, some parts of the country, they don't pay anything. In fact, in some parts of the country, the buyer pays it and the seller, each side pays their own commission. So we're kind of unique here to a certain extent. So, all right, Article 3, SOP 3.1. Realtors acting as exclusive agents or brokers of the seller or landlord establish the terms and condition of offers to cooperate. So that means that the brokers establish if they're going to pay a cooperating broker or not, or pay that buyer side of the commission. Unless expressly indicated in the offers to cooperate, cooperating brokers may not assume that an offer of cooperation is included. We really don't have to worry about that here because we have the MLS where being a member of the MLS and you advertise a payout to 2.4, 2.8, whatever you're paying, that is the agreement. And you can be held to that standard if you end up not paying. This is really important in areas like Western Nebraska where we have realtor members, but there is no MLS, where we have that MLS to post the payout for the cooperating brokers. So you can, as a buyer's agent, assume that just because they are a member, they are going to pay you some kind of compensation. Any compensation terms have to be basically ascertained by all parties involved before you begin the offer process. It's not okay to write up an offer as a buyer's agent, submit it to the broker, and then say, I would like some compensation. Certainly you can do that, but if that listing broker says, I'm not paying anything, you're stuck, you're screwed. That's why the code says that you need to establish what that payout is, get that payout established in writing before you submit the offer. Article 3 is basically there for those non-MLS areas. And actually there's more non-MLS areas than you would think across the country. So any questions up to this point from anybody? I'm going to ask a very honest and brutal question here. If you really don't care, give me a thumbs up. Look at that, no one, great, that's awesome. Way to lie, everybody's lying. I'm just kidding. All right, standard practice 4. Remember, 115 and 3.4, they work hand in hand, and you're going to understand why 115 is so important. So let's break this one down. We're going to spend a little bit of time here. It says realtors acting as listing brokers, they have an affirmative obligation to disclose the existence of dual or variable commission agreements or commission rates. This is where the listing, where we have, for example, you may be the listing agent and you have a provision that it's a 6% listing if an outside company or anybody other than you brings the buyer, but it's 5% if you do a double bubble, a dual agency. That's a dual type of listing commission agreement. So a variable rate is technically considered when there's 3 or more. So you may have a situation, back when I first got in the business in the mid 90s, it was real common to see a 765. So it was 7% if an outside broker brought the buyer, it was 6% if it was an in-house buyer deal, and then it was 5% if it was a dual agency. Those were pretty common back in the mid 90s when I got in. So that's what it's talking about. If you have a dual or variable rate, you must disclose that before an offer is submitted. Now, the good thing is on our MLS, that field is provided, and it has a little acronym. It's exclusive right to sell. So it's exclusive right to sell, ERTS variable, or VAR in parentheses.
Who do you submit that to? I mean, you made that agreement with who you're listing it for.
Right.
But do I have to tell the other agent, hey, my commission's 6% if I have an outside broker and it's 5% if I sell it myself?
Hang on to that because we're going to come back to that. I'll answer that question in the next slide. Great question, though. I'm just trying to establish that at this point, we have to disclose only if it's a dual and variable rate. The MLS requires us to do that anyway. So if you only get one, let's say you just get a 7% commission, then it's just an exclusive right to sell. It doesn't matter if it's a double bubble, outside cooperating broker, someone in your firm, the payout is the payout. So the net to the seller is going to be the same.
Right.
If it's a dual, the net to the seller is not going to be the same. If it's a variable, the net to the seller is not going to be the same. So we have to disclose if it's a variable rate. The MLS requires us to do that. So that's the good thing. So if you're a buyer's agent, you need to look on the MLS to see what code is checked. Is it just an exclusive right, or is this an exclusive right to sell with a variable rate commission agreement or listing agreement?
Very good.
And it's right on the MLS.
All right.
All right. It says, it goes on, if you read there in the middle, it says the listing broker shall, as soon as practical, disclose the existence of such arrangements to potential cooperating brokers and shall, In response to inquiries from cooperating brokers, disclose the differential that would result in a cooperative transaction. So here's what this means. I got an example up here. Let's say that you're the listing agent and you have one of those variable rates. You have a 765. If an outside cooperating broker brings the agent, it's a 7% commission. That means the seller, that's the seller owns a 7%. If it's an in-house buyer's agent, it's 6%. And if you're a double bubble or dual agent, boom, it's 5%. Now notice what I did here, just to keep the math simple. You have 3 offers and all of them are 200,000. Look at the commission, total commission that the 7%. So if the seller accepts that cooperating buyer's agent's contract, then that means the seller is going to pay a $14,000 total commission. If the seller accepts the in-house buyer, they're going to pay a total of 12, which the differential is 2. If the seller accepts the listing agent's purchase agreement, the double bubble, then they only have to pay $10,000 in total commission, which is a differential of $4,000. Does that make sense? You see how I came up with all of that? So what your requirement is, going back here, in response, well, first of all, your requirement is to disclose a dual or variable rate. And then in response to inquiries, if I'm one of those 3, let's say that I am the cooperating agent from a different broker. I work for 12th Street Realty. You have the listing with PJMRE, and you tell me that there is a multi-offer situation. Then I have a right to ask you, okay, great. I see in the MLS that it's a variable rate commission structure. Where were the sources of the buyers? Where did they come from? I have a right to ask that under SOP 115. And then I also have a right to ask for the differential right here. So I can go, hey, Susan, you got 3 offers. They came from these places. I see it's an exclusive right to sell with a variable rate. What's the differential? Meaning how far behind is my buyer based on that variable commission rate? She has to tell me not what the commission rate is. She has to say, Paul, listen, right now, based on all the offers that I have, your client is $4,000 behind based on the commission structure. Does that make sense? How I came up with that? Does anybody not understand how this happens? Okay, good. Here's what we find. A buyer's agent wants to do this. They call up the listing agent and say, listen, it's a variable rate. I see that in the commission or in the MLS. You have several offers. What's the differential? How far behind am I? And the listing agent, what do you think their response is? Yeah, go jump in a lake. Screw you. That's none of your business. And then you have to remind them that, hey, under SOP 3.4, you have to provide me that information. They still tell you to get screwed. Then you have the conversation with the broker, and then the broker is either going to do the right thing or not. And ultimately, if the broker and the agent doesn't give you the information that they're required to under the code, then you have the option of filing an ethics complaint. I've never seen this done. I have seen several agents, though, they do ask this question. There are a handful that do. I just want to put it out there because as a buyer's agent, you're entitled to it if everything is applicable. And on the listing side, remember, as a listing agent, you also have an obligation to provide this. So just here's the downside on the buyer side. A lot of buyer agents will say, well, yeah, but then I have to go to my client and tell them that they have to come up with $4,000 more. The other thing is they're afraid of is the buyer's agents are afraid then their buyer's going to basically abandon them and go directly to the listing agent to try to get a better deal and get the house. All of those are legitimate. There's no obligation as a buyer's agent to do this. It's just a tool should you want to use it. So I really want to impress upon you, it's not an obligation. It is not something like under license law that you're obligated to do this on behalf of your client. It's only a tool. It's there if you think you want to utilize it. So that's all I got on 3.4. Any questions? I feel like I'm zooming through this.
That's good.
Was that a pun intended?
No.
Oh, that's a good one. No, it wasn't intended, but it is a pun. All right, so now we're really going to start cruising here. So Article 4 and 5, just briefly, Article 4 requires you have to disclose if you have a personal outcome of the, and we all know that. We've known that since our pre-license days. But here's one thing I do want to point out, and I don't know why this is, but agents think that if they're selling their own property, for example, and the property is owned by an LLC, that they don't have to disclose that they're a principal. That is not true in Nebraska or under the code. If this property is owned by an LLC and you have a financial interest in that LLC, you have to make the disclosure. I don't know what the big deal is anyways, but there's just some people that don't want to disclose nothing. And I'm like, what's the big deal? But Article 5, that if you have an interest in a professional service that you're recommending. So maybe you or your brother or your parents or whatever, your kids, they own a termite company and you're recommending that termite company for inspections for your client. You can do that, but you have to make the disclosure to them beforehand that, hey, my brother owns this. So if you're okay with that, awesome. And we want that in writing. It's called a controlled business arrangement. And that's actually also required under RESPA. So Article 6 says no kickbacks. I think we're all pretty familiar with no kickbacks. Remember, how many of you were around when, give me a thumbs up. Remember when Service One, we'd get like $60 kickback every time you recommended them? That was freaking awesome. Those were the days. Yeah, you can't do that you couldn't actually do it back then, but. Article 7 and 8. Article 7 is an interesting one. And I don't know the origin. We actually, when I was in Chicago a couple years ago, we actually went through the arbitration manual to find out why this was put in there. But realtors cannot accept commission from more than one party unless all the parties involved in the transaction agree. If the seller's the only one paying, that's fine. But actually, the interesting thing is the reason we have the broker administrative commissions in the purchase contract is so everybody can agree to it. Because the buyer is paying a commission called the BAC and the seller's paying a commission. So there's two parties paying and they all have to agree to it. And that's why the BAC is actually included in the purchase contract the way that it is. Because it is technically a commission. The Supreme Court, there was a case that they ruled on about 5 years ago. We used to call it a broker administration fee and we had to change it to commission, because a fee was a RESPA violation, they said, but a commission isn't. And that's why we call it a BAC. Just a little fact if you were interested. But Article, yes.
Can I ask you one quick question?
Sure.
So if I'm listing a property, it hasn't sold and 90 days have gone by and the owner says, hey, we're going to give $5,000 bonus if you can get this thing sold in the next 45 days. Susan brings in the offer, and let's say she's at a different company or someone at a different company comes. And you'd tell them that, I assume. Do they have to tell their buyer that, the agent making the sale? Or let's say I'm making the sale and I get $5,000 if I get it sold as a bonus. Do I have to disclose that to you as a buyer?
It depends on how it's written in the listing contract or the agreement that establishes the commission. Who is that $5,000 for?
It's for whoever sells the house. If you can get it sold, PJ, in the next 30 days, I'm going to give you a $5,000 bonus.
Right, but that is vague in nature. So what does that mean being sold? Does that mean that through my efforts, I procured a buyer? Does that mean that I directly have to bring the buyer? I think the best thing to do is to clarify it. So we're going to put in that listing contract specifically who gets the $5,000. The commission is 5%. There's a $5,000 buyer agent bonus, a $5,000, or hey, Susan's the listing agent. Susan, you get this done. In addition to the 5% that I'm paying, I'll give you a $5,000 bonus. Then there's no requirement to disclose to anybody.
Okay, and let's say they did say the seller who listed it with myself, for example, says, hey, if somebody brings a buyer, I want them to know we're going to give them a $5,000 bonus.
Right.
And that's written into the deal. Whoever brings a buyer gets $5,000 plus they're part of the commission. Now, does that buyer's agent have to disclose to his buyer, hey, just want you to know, Paul, before you buy this, it's listed by somebody else, but I get a $5,000 bonus besides my share of the commission?
And the answer is no, because
Okay.
the commission and under the code, they look at that $5,000 bonus is just an extension of the original commission. And we don't tell, we have no obligation to tell our buyers that we're getting 2.4 or 2.8. So there's no requirement to disclose or them to agree to the bonus.
Okay,
So
thank you.
This is actually meaning where it's like the buyer's paying commission and the seller's paying commission, or the seller's paying part of the commission and a relo is paying part. Then all parties have to agree. Great question. Article 8 just simply says that if you use a trust account, oh my gosh, I'm way over, ain't I? I'm so sorry. On break. Whew. How come somebody didn't throw, Gloria, how come you didn't throw something at me?
I really should have. I'm volunteering.
Oh.
Okay.
So let's do 8 and then we'll take our last break. So Article 8 says that if you're a member and your state does not require a designated broker to use a trust account, that under the code, you have to use a trust account, but all 50 states now require it. So they could probably delete Article 8. Any questions up to this point? Anybody? All right, so let's come back at, let's see, it's 2 o'clock. So let's come back about 2:13. I got some good news, but I'll tell you after the back when we come back. Tell you just, the question is, where do you have to make the disclosure? So if you're selling a property, and this is mostly right now for sellers that are agents. So if you're an agent and you're selling your own property, you have to make the disclosure. But the reason I'm bringing this up is traditionally agents would make the disclosure in the purchase contract, which is fine. But what we're seeing is the underwriters kicking it back and saying, well, that's fine, but we consider this not an arm's length transaction, and they won't fund it. And it's happening at the 11th hour, like that week before closing. Not the buyer side, the seller side. That's what's unique about this. We have had issues where the buyer's representing themselves and then the lender will say you can't collect a commission because you're representing yourself. That's been around for a while. Now we're seeing that if the seller is the listing agent and they're selling their own house, then they're not funding the buyers. And it's starting to happen more and more because they're making that disclosure in the purchase contract. So if you have agents that sell their own properties, it is perfectly legal to put the disclosure on page 4 of the seller property condition disclosure statement, because under that specific law, that disclosure must be given to the buyer prior to the time of the purchase contract being sold or signed. That's required by statute. So therefore, you're giving the disclosure that the listing agent owns that house prior to the contract. So it's legit. Just something to think about. I don't know if you guys have a lot of agents that sell their own stuff, but these deals are hard enough to keep together. One less thing you can mitigate, the better. So, and the other thing is PJ brought up about the $5,000 bonus. Do we have to disclose it to the buyer? The answer is still no, but there is one thing I highly recommend if you don't already have it. If you don't have verbiage in your listing contract that says that, keep it generic, but you have to have something in your listing contract that refers to how you're going to pay cooperating brokers. not what you're going to pay. Most brokers just have generic language that says that the seller gives us permission that at our own discretion that we compensate cooperating brokers. Leave it that simple. But under the code, you do have to have some kind of reference where the seller's giving you permission to do that. One other thing, if you're licensed in Iowa, you have to specifically have in your listing contract what the cooperating payout is. So if you're just keep that in mind. So you might want to change again, if you're licensed in Iowa, then make sure that's in there. So, all right, ready to move on?
Yes.
All right, so Article 10 through 14 is the duties that agents owe to the general public. Article 10 is about discrimination. It simply means that if you get busted for discrimination, then they can prosecute you under the Code of Ethics. Article 11 says that if you're a realtor, you must maintain or only practice in that area of real estate that you're an expert in. So I'll give you a prime example. Many years ago, when I first got in the business, when I first became a trainer at the company I was at, I had an agent that had been in the business about 6 months. I think probably had maybe 2 small residential transactions under their belt. And they knew the owner of the building where Walmart was over there on, they closed. It's like 102nd and 4th Street, right off of 680. And he was trying to get that listing for lease. And he was trying to get it because it was probably going to be, maybe $100,000 commission. I mean, it was just this huge commission as, being on the leasing as a leasing agent. And I was like, you can't do that because you have absolutely no experience and no one at the company knows how to help you. So this agent left. And then I seen in the Douglas County Daily Record about 8 months later, he had done the exact same thing. He had actually done that with a different company or different commercial transaction, and they were suing him for $86,000. So point is, Article 11, you have to operate within the expertise or the area that you're expert in or that you're being supervised in. So if you're a residential agent, that's your expertise. That's your area. To get into commercial, you have to do one of 2 things. So if you have a buddy that has a commercial property and you don't know anything about it, you either have to go to that buddy and say, listen, I know nothing about commercial, but if you still let me do this, great. Get them to sign the disclosure, you're good to go. Otherwise, you can't do it unless you're working under somebody that knows how to do it and they're going to mentor you. So where we're seeing this in the residential side of things is in new construction. New construction is getting very, very complicated in many respects. And you may have a seasoned agent that has a lot of residential transactions, but no new construction. And then they're going out and doing new construction deals. And, every new construction contract is different. And that's not their area. So just a little word of caution, get some training in that new construction area if you're going to go down that road. Article 12 is where the fun is. This is the most fun article of them all. We're going to have fun here. So you get to be the judge and the jury. You get to be a member of what we call the Professional Standards Committee. So let me explain what I mean. If there is an ethics complaint filed against you, that package is sent to a group of realtors, usually it's 5 to 7, and they make up what's called a grievance committee. The grievance committee is like a grand jury. They don't determine whether the complaint is valid or innocent or guilt. They only determine whether or not they think something is legitimate, and then they move it up to the next committee, which is the Professional Standards Committee. That becomes a full-blown trial. The Professional Standards Committee members are all realtors. There'll be a trial. They'll have a judge, which is the attorney for the Nebraska Realtors Association. You can have witnesses. You can have legal counsel represent you, everything. So this exercise is required for the every 3-year training from NAR. This is where we used to do a group participation. So what I'm going to do is give you the standard. Article 12 is the standard for advertising. And then I'm going to give you real photos that were used in real MLSs across the United States. and you have to determine whether or not it violates one of the SOPs in Article 12. Again, there is no right or wrong answer. You might have thought O.J. Simpson was guilty. If you were on the jury, you could have said guilty. You might have thought O.J. Simpson was innocent. If you were on that jury, you could have said he was innocent and voted that way. No matter what the evidence says, it's the same principle here. All right, so you get to be the judge and the jury. So this is going to be fun. So let's look at Article 12. SOP 12, 1 and 2 basically says that you as a realtor, if you're going to advertise anything for free, it must be for free. There was two geniuses in Ohio that they were sending out marketing material that said, hey, I'll give you a free CMA, which is fine. But what they didn't tell anybody is if you didn't list the property with them, then they were sending a $395 valuation bill and they were placing liens against the property if they didn't pay it. They weren't disclosing that. That was the problem. It would have been perfectly okay if they'd have said, hey, it's a free CMA if you list with us. If you don't, then you owe us $395. That would have been okay. They didn't do it. So that's why SOP 12, 1 and 2 was instituted. SOP 12.5, we all know this, the name of the broker has to be included in the advertisement. SOP 12.6, realtors must disclose ownership when selling or renting their own property, whether it's listed or they're doing it FSBO. Now, this is a little different than license law. I think we all know that if you sell your own property, even if it's not listed, you're doing it FSBO, we have to make that disclosure. That's why we see things in the MLS like agent has equity, those type of things. We're making the disclosure. License law does not require the same if you're advertising one of your properties that you own for rent. There is not a disclosure requirement for renting, but there is under the Code of Ethics. So if you are out there and you're renting your own property, then you have to make that disclosure. So that's why I threw it out there. And then SOP 12.12 is fairly new, and it says that your URLs, which is a web address, has to be truthful. And I got some examples here. So if you
Paul, can I ask a question real quick on the rent thing?
Yes, you can.
So would that be just in the same manner? You would just say owner of property as a licensed agent?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So
Okay.
let's say you had a family member renting it. Should they say, hey, my dad owns this or my brother owns this property I'm trying to rent to you?
Under the Code of
And
Ethics.
they're licensed agent?
Absolutely. Yeah, it would. Because the code does extend to family members that are participating in your business.
And what about on the sign? So it says for rent, should you have on that sign broker owned? I know we're asking a lot of little.
No, that's a great question. Actually, the code doesn't specifically address that detail. It just says you have to make the disclosure. It really doesn't say when and where, to be honest with you. Like the real estate license law is very specific on when you have to do it, but it only applies it if you're selling your own house, and it doesn't apply to rentals. There's an exemption built in. The code, it's not that specific. It just says you have to make the disclosure. So
could be in the
And
lease.
when you disclose,
Absolutely.
you almost ought to make it in writing. Otherwise, they could say, no, he never told me he owned it.
Susan made a great point. A lot of people just put it right in the lease.
Mhm.
And
Okay.
then it's assumed that you're going through that lease before they sign it. And if you don't go bullet point, I do think you probably need to point that out, because again, especially with tenants right now, because tenants, that whole landlord-tenant relationship is volatile, and many tenants are just looking for a pound of flesh for any reason. Don't give them an issue. You can cure it by just putting it right in the lease.
Perfect. Thank you.
So Article 12, SOP 1210. This is the standard that we're going to use for this exercise. It basically, if you read through, and we're not going to read through it all, here's what it says. Your advertising, no matter what your method is, must be truthful and not misleading. You can't have deceptive or misleading photos, websites, any type of advertising must be truthful and not misleading. That is the basic premise of Article 1210. Article 1212 was included a few years ago. The same standard is 1210, but now it applies to URLs, which is a web address. And here's why, and I'm just going to give you a little disclosure here. We're going to get into a little bit of adult content here. So what was happening is really tech savvy agents, they were linking their real estate website to the porn side of the internet because of the way the algorithms work and the way the spiders go out and search. So you could have a real estate website and you could meta tag it with all of these terms that's used on porno sites. And all of a sudden, this real estate agent is coming up #1 on page 1 ahead of, you know, big companies that are spending millions of dollars on SEO, and that's how they were doing it. Well, one aspect that was really, really valuable is that web address. And so an agent would get they would register a web address, give you, you know, so bigboobs.com, but they would actually get very, very graphic and detailed. And you would go to that website and it would be their real estate website. The SEO on it was so powerful that they would, again, be #1 on page 1 of a Google search. So NAR said, no more of this. We consider that to be false advertising. The web address has to be somewhat real estate related. It can't be totally misleading. This is still a little volatile because there hasn't been too much case precedent set within the ethics process, but they have actually gone after a few real estate agents in different states for this. That's important to know because that's the standard that we're going to use. So what we're going to do next is give you, now remember, all your advertising has to be truthful and it can't be misleading. All right, so we're going to go through some actual photos that were in MLSs, which is considered advertising, and you have to determine whether or not they are misleading. What we're going to do is I'm going to ask you, you know, are they guilty? You're going to give a thumbs up, not guilty, thumbs down. So let's look at the first one. This was in a South Carolina MLS, and in the MLS it said a beautiful pool in the backyard. So what do you think? If somebody actually filed an ethics complaint against this particular agent, and it went through the process, it went to the professional standards committee. If you were on that professional standards committee and you were reading the MLS input sheet, you see that photo and it says beautiful pool in the backyard, would you say that violated Article 12, yes or no? Thumbs up or thumbs down? All right, let's see here. I'm cruising through. Keep your thumbs up. Yeah, kind of a... Susan, if you choose not to decide, you have not made a choice. You know what? Actually, so the Professional Standards Committee did not think it was a violation. Again, there's no right or wrong answer. If you were on there, you could have voted guilty and hung them, just like a jury. I personally think probably, unless it's this property is being marketed to Kermit the Frog, I think there is some misrepresentation there. It would have been.
Suppose the argument was that there was a photo, right, that showed it.
That's what I was thinking. It's not like, I mean, to me, it's a little sarcastic and kind of funny, but yeah, there's a photo. Clearly not a beautiful pool.
But that, yeah, I guess you have to assume that every piece of advertising, they're seeing the photo.
Yeah, that's true. There's no right or wrong. What about this one? No comments, no nothing. This was just in the MLS photo book, and somebody filed. This is an actual house. I think it was like in Oregon or Washington, if I remember. I think we all know what that looks like, right? But is it an ethics violation? No, I don't. I mean, you could say yes, but I mean, that's the structure of the house, like it or not. What about this one? Let me take you home. It's gorgeous inside.
Not a great end.
Thumbs up or thumbs down? Well, the real estate or the professional standards committee said, no, we don't see any problem with it. We know exactly what the intent of what she is saying. So no, we don't find it to be misleading, but certainly you could hang her if you wanted to. What about this one?
How do you find these, Paul?
That's what I wondered.
Yeah.
I don't even know what to say about this one.
What do you
Oh
think?
my
Thumbs
gosh.
up or thumbs down? Got to vote. Yeah, distasteful. Yeah,
Violation up,
Totally.
right?
I don't think I don't think it's misleading or untruthful in any way, but
It's gross.
it is. And you know, here's the thing. We all live and die by that as a realtor, right? So realtor John puts that out there. If that hits the social media and it goes viral, then you and I in Omaha are the butt of the joke with our friends. Hey, you're in real estate. Did you see this guy? You know, what about this one? This one really is, I mean, it is what it is, right? I actually put this one in here, not because it's a violation, you know, it's truthful, it's not misleading. How many of you would take this listing? That's really the question I want to know.
I wouldn't take it.
For the brokers, managing brokers, how many of you would allow this? Would you allow your agent to list this?
No.
No.
Sometimes you got to say no.
I have a question.
Yes.
You don't take a picture of that and you list it. Is that not being fully transparent?
No, but I think it actually is worse because then you're going to get all the buyer's agent calling and screaming going, you could have told me and warned me first. Come on. I think if you are going to list it, the best thing you can do is put the photo out there.
Right, full disclosure.
Get a hammer and bash it out.
But there is no way in
Bring some
Hades.
paint.
Yeah, there's no way in Hades that if I'm the managing broker, no agent in my firm would touch this with a 10-foot pole.
Yeah.
Mhm.
In
This
case
be
anyone was
considered
wondering, that applies here too.
Yeah.
I'll second that.
Could this be
Article
considered
3.
a discrimination issue?
What's that?
Could that be considered like a discrimination issue?
Technically, yes, but it's legal discrimination. You're legally saying you're discriminating against a seller, but it's legal because being a racist is not a protected class. And quite frankly, you guys are going to make this decision not on race or anything that's a protected class. You're going to make the decision not to list this based on legitimate business reasons. And I think any broker could legitimately outline probably 20 pages of items why they would not want to list this, including the bad publicity. So is it discrimination? Yeah, but it's legal. I mean, smokers, we can legally say, I'm not going to rent to you because you smoke. Is that discrimination? It is, but it's legal to do so.
Well, I mean, like for the broker to advertise this photo, could that be
No.
discriminating towards the buyer, you know, saying you're only looking for a certain type of buyer to live in this home?
No, you know, that's a great point, but I don't believe so. I don't think it would be because it's material condition of the property. I just don't think it would be. But again, as a broker, that's one of the many reasons why I would not, because understand this, the best defense against a fair housing complaint is never to get one in the first place. That one there says, I'm going to file a complaint and let the process happen anyways and see what happens.
Yeah,
So-
stupidity and bad taste aren't illegal.
Exactly. That was actually in an MLS for about 2 days. And then somebody finally caught it and they did away with it. So Article 13 says you're not a lawyer, so don't practice law. We've heard that one. Article 14, this is where we start getting on the agent on agent stuff. So Article 14 says that realtors are required to cooperate with any and all investigations or risk losing their membership. It's the only place in the entire code where you can get the death sentence, meaning you can be dismembered from the association. You can do a lot of other stuff, but if you don't cooperate with any type of ethics investigation, you can actually lose your membership. All right, let's look at 15. Article 15 is, this is where we start getting in on how do we, how we treat one another. It says realtors shall not knowingly or recklessly make false or misleading statements about other real estate professionals, their business, or their business practices. That is a very, very, very broad statement, and it is applied very broadly in the arbitration manual that the Professional Standards Committee would use for guidance, for precedent. A couple of things you should know. Number one is this isn't just member on member issues. If you do any of these things against a non-member that's in the real estate profession, it is still an ethics violation because you are a member and you're the one that's committing the violation of the code. So you got to be real careful what you say in listing appointments, what you say if you're out there bad-mouthing another broker, another agent, and they can prove it, they can file a complaint. And now with so many sellers and whatnot are videotaping, whether illegal or not, listing appointments and showings and stuff, that's getting a lot more prominent. I mean, just go to your Facebook page and you'll see what agents say. So I just wanted to put that out there. This is interpreted very liberally, so be careful what you say about people in the business. And then if you actually are found guilty, then there are remedies, including they can make you publish something in a periodical in the OABR monthly magazine that goes out or something to that effect, depending on the level of recklessness that they determine. So that is your venue. So if somebody says something bad about you that harms you in any way, then your article of choice is Article 15. And then Article 16, we're going to talk about two SOPs in particular. I do want to talk about this one, 16.6. Says when realtors are contacted by the client of another realtor regarding the creation of an exclusive relationship to provide the same service, and the realtors have not directly or indirectly initiated the discussion, they may discuss the terms upon which they might enter into a future agreement, or alternatively may enter into an agreement which becomes effective upon the expiration of any existing exclusive agreement. So let me put this in layman's terms. Let's say that you have a house listed for sale, and I meet your seller in the line at Baker's. And they say, hey, I got my house listed. My agent isn't doing a good job. Can you come and, tell me what the value is and what can you do for me? Since the seller initiated the contact, I could go to the house and look through it. I could discuss things that I would do. What I cannot do in any way is throw you, the listing agent, under the bus. I can't discuss anything about the terms that you have with that seller. So if the seller is going, well, my current agent is doing X, Y, and Z, what do you think? I can't discuss it. Now, one thing I do want to point out here, because it says that if I were to go to your seller's house, I could actually get a listing contract, for example, signed and make it effective the day after your listing contract expires. Under the Code of Ethics, that's okay. However, in the state of Nebraska, you cannot do that. About 5 years ago, the Real Estate Commission made a ruling that if the scenario I just gave you, if I go to that house and I do that very thing, then I'm in violation of Nebraska license law. So I know that used to be standard practice and it was perfectly legal, but you can no longer do that. I can talk to that seller about what I would do after it expires, but I cannot enter into an agreement even if it goes into effect after that contract has expired. I will tell you as a sidebar, I've had several discussions with attorneys that believe that if it was ever challenged in court, it would probably be overturned, but we don't want to get there. I don't want to be the one that has to do that, right? So that's why I wanted to throw that out there in case you have any agents that want to do that. Any questions on any of that?
So you're saying you can discuss what you would do in the future, you just can't write up the contract, essentially?
Correct. And you cannot critique the current listing agent. That would not be okay.
Mhm.
Did I just hear that you said that you cannot list it even after expiration? Maybe I'm not paying attention, but that's what I thought you said.
What you couldn't do is enter into a listing agreement now and make it effective 10 days from now, which is the
Oh.
day after the current listing expires.
I got you. Okay.
Make sense?
Yep.
All right, and then the last one we're going to discuss here is the 1616. This is kind of an interesting one because it does happen every once in a while. Basically, to paraphrase this, is you cannot use the terms of a purchase contract to negotiate a cooperating agent payout or a cooperating broker payout. If the MLS says it's a 2.4% payout, 1616 says it would be against the code of violation or the code of ethics if a buyer's agent wrote into the purchase contract that the payout be 3%. You can use the purchase contract to establish an unpaid or an unpublished payout, but once that payout has been established, you cannot use the terms of the contract to modify it. So I get that call probably once a week. I'll get an agent that'll call or a broker that'll call and say, hey, can they do this? I got a counter offer here. I got an offer here and they're making it contingent upon me paying them 3.5%. I bet I get that once a week at the school. So if that happens to you, just remind them that that violates SOP 1616 and take it out of there or you're going to file a complaint. And you should actually. So, all right. Article 17 is the last article. It just simply says that you as a member, you agree that any commission disputes between brokers are going to be determined through the ethics process, that you agree not to go into the courts to settle it. They don't want our dirty laundry being aired in the public forum. So if you're a member of NAR and there's a dispute between two brokers on commission, we resolve it through arbitration through the ethics process. So I've actually been involved in 2 of those in my career. They're quite interesting, actually. We already talked about this, code enforcement. If you are the one that's being accused, you have a right to legal counsel. You have a right to know the nature of the complaint, prepare a defense, call a witness, present evidence. It's just like a little mini trial. And then if you're found guilty, here's all the things that the Professional Standards Committee can give you. The $15,000 fine is only for a couple of instances. It's not something that can just be dished out for anything. They can give you any number or combination of these things. So it's 2:45. I've actually finished the code, but there is one last thing that I have to do because you have to do one group exercise for NAR. So here's what we're going to do. Thumbs up or thumbs down using the photo thing. Is this photo an ethics violation? You're on the Professional Standards Committee. It's in front of you. Do you say, yes, it's an ethics violation or no? Remember the standard. Is this ad misleading or untrue? Everyone has to vote. Yes or no? Personally, I'd say no. I think it's kind of cool. It's true, right? Neighbors across the street are quiet.
True.
One could argue whether it's distasteful or not, but all right, that's all I have, guys. We're done. Thank you very much.
Oh, you did a nice job. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Paul.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you so much, Paul.
And hey, real quick, if you guys have any questions or anything, you can always call me at the school, but you'll get your certificate. Again, I'll report it probably on Monday to the commission, and then you guys, I'm going to send your certificates to the office and you'll have them there. So thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Lauren, are you still on?
I am.
Okay. Anything else you need?
No, that's great for me. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Well, I hope I didn't bore them too bad.
No, I think it was great. They seemed very engaged.
Right on. Yeah, just whenever, just email me over who was there.
Okay. And do you want only the attendance of like the licensed agents in terms of, I know for reporting to the commission, yes, but in terms of invoicing, do you want everyone or only
It-
the licensed?
Here's the thing. I don't care if you had unlicensed people, but you want documentation that they went through the training. I'll send them a certificate. They just won't have they just won't have an ID number, but I know some brokers like to have that documentation. So
No, I just document it on our end. And so the sheet I send you will have both the licensed and unlicensed people on it. So I just wanted to.
yeah,
sure,
if you
but it'll
could,
be
if you
very
do that,
clear.
just segment them out. Just say
Yep.
that, the top 10 or just
Yep,
segment
it'll
them
be
out.
really obvious.
Perfect. I appreciate
Okay.
that.
Yeah, no problem. Also, I actually have it right now.
Okay.
I did it while we were working on it with the assumption that no one dipped out.
Not a problem. I
I'll email
appreciate
that
you
over to you.
proctoring it.
No problem. Thank you for doing everything.
Right on. Now I got to figure out how to get out of here.
I will end it and it will kick you out.
Perfect.
All right. Thanks.
All
Paul.
right. Thank you.